Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm not Canadian, so I don't have quite such a loud and booming voice as Nick, but hopefully the speaker system is working. I'd like to, following that very interesting presentation on China, just step back a bit and take more of a helicopter view of the Asia-Pacific region, which that's quite a challenge in 15 or 20 minutes, actually, as obviously it's a huge and very diverse area, but just touch briefly on some of the key countries and some of the issues that we see being relevant to doing business and specifically to gathering market intelligence and finding out about what's going on in a region like this. As Nick said with China, it's very essential to do your research, understand where the opportunities are, the specific dynamics for your business and so on. It's equally true in Asia Pacific, of course, as well. So what I'll show you is just a few extracts from a white paper that we published very recently. That's available for free to anybody who would like it. We also actually have white papers on many of the other areas and countries that you'll see this evening. So briefly, not so much to sort of promote our company to you, but just to illustrate the key, what I think is the key feature of the Asia-Pacific region, which is its diversity. I wanted to show you how we operate in the region. So we actually have 4 offices, so India, Singapore, which is where I'm based incidentally, Hong Kong and Shanghai, which is where Nick's from. We also have a partner company in Japan, headed up by Fuji here at the front. And you'll notice, I mean, although it is a very huge and diverse region, we don't actually have offices all over the place in all the different countries. What we do is we have several hundred consultants based all across the region. And the reason for that really is the diversity of the area is just so much that even if we were to invest in another 5 or 6 offices, 10 people in each office, we would still not have the capability to cover the kind of ground and pick up the kind of information, deal with all the different industries, all the different languages, geographical areas, and so on that we need to tackle in our work. So it's really just symptomatic of the nature of the region that over the 15 years or so that we've been developing this kind of work in Asia, this is the model which has emerged as a very effective model. So we have our consultants all over the place, all the way down to New Zealand, across to India, up to Japan, in China, obviously, as Nick said, 250 or so there, Southeast Asia, Australia, and so on. And then our offices are really just in the regional hubs where a lot of the multinational companies or companies which are internationalizing, venturing into Asia from Europe are putting their headquarters. So a lot of companies would tend to start, if they want to go into Asia, either in Singapore or Hong Kong. These are the sort of classic regional hubs. Singapore tends to be a bit more of a hub for Southeast Asia and in many cases India as well. Hong Kong, more for Greater China and Northeast Asia as well. So those are the sort of 2 obvious hubs that companies would start in. Then if they're going directly into the China market or the Indian market, then they might be putting offices in those places. So yeah, just a brief agenda, a quick overview of some of the countries and then some of the challenges that we see for market intelligence. So some fast facts for Asia. It's the biggest region in the world, both in terms of geographical space and population. So 60% of the world's population is in Asia-Pac. China and India, obviously the number 1 and number 2 most populous countries with populations in the billions. We then have a couple of countries with populations in the hundreds of millions, Indonesia and Japan. Maybe many people are not aware actually that Indonesia is a country with more than 200 million people in it. Huge. One of the when we recruit new people for our office, being in the intelligence business, what we found is we can actually shortcut our recruitment process very easily. Instead of going through hours of interviews, tests, and so on, simply ask them one question: what's the population of Indonesia? And the answers range from 30 million to 1 billion. A lot of people, for some reason, don't know, but those who know, population of Indonesia are exactly the kind of people we're looking for. But it's just one example. Even people who've been in the region a lot, spent a lot of time maybe in China, Japan, or wherever, Indonesia, although it's part of the region, is an unknown, and it's just an illustration of the diversity within Asia-Pac. So yeah, China and India, obviously, Indonesia, Japan, and the growth in the region is quite heavily driven by China and India, the two very big markets and very fast-growing markets relative to others. But having said that, if you look around the region, you also have very strong growth rates in some of the other countries, as we'll see in a minute, especially compared to the sort of 1 or 2% that you might expect in European countries. We're looking at 4, 5, even 10. Singapore grew 14% last year, for example. These kind of numbers do come in. Yeah, so it is an uneven development in many ways, although pretty fast if you look at the overall picture. And as Nick pointed out, within China, there's a lot of differences within the country, but that's the same thing. A lot of the countries in Southeast Asia as well have similar characteristics. There's many cases of what geographers call primacy, which is where the capital city is extremely successful and fast-growing. The upcountry or the rest of the country tends to be very heavily lagging behind. Those kind of situations are quite common. Okay, so yeah, just to give you some overview of the way we look at things and break the region down. We have East Asia, of course, which is including China, Greater China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. South Asia, so obviously India, Southeast Asia, that's only Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, and so on. Then Australia and or Australasia, as we could call it, so Australia, New Zealand, plus some smaller countries there as well. 60% of the world's population, around 3,000 languages. So the diversity comes through in the language situation as well. Somebody reminded me yesterday about the term that IBM have coined reasonably recently, I think, globish, which is a form of English which means basically English spoken by people who are non-native English speakers. And globish is fairly prevalent in Asia. There are some exceptions, but it's becoming increasingly possible to communicate in English in many of the countries. Probably some of the biggest exceptions would be Japan, where they're very proud of their excellent and long heritage. Korea as well, to some extent, and some people may say Australia, but that may be a little bit unfair. We have a few associations, actually not particularly strong ones compared to, country groupings, we should say, compared to European Union. Of course, these are fairly weak, but the Association of Southeast Asian Nations is probably the main one. It's been around for a long time, is kind of a political organization in many ways, and perhaps not that helpful for business. They have come up with many bilateral or trilateral or multilateral agreements. Whether these things actually have a lot of effect on business is another matter altogether. That's kind of a symptomatic thing of Southeast Asia, actually. It's a very interesting region, and politics are very important in Southeast Asia. If you want to tickle the surface, scratch the surface of business in the region, no problem. It's kind of what we do. We're a small company. You know, dive into Singapore, very easy to set up a business there. Find clients easily enough. Few bits of small bits and pieces of business here and there. Build things up over a few years, and it goes okay. If you really want to do serious business in Southeast Asia, you need to start golfing with politicians, basically. I can't play golf, so I know for a fact that our company is never going to get beyond a certain level, but you know, that's fine. So that's Southeast Asia and ASEAN. APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. This is something driven out of the States. Again, it's a little bit fuzzy. It happens. They have summits. It's kind of a bit of a privilege to host the APEC summit and so on. Doesn't actually achieve all that much, in my opinion. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to still national territories and these kind of situations. And then again, I suppose that's partly reflected in the currency situation. So there's no unified currency. There's no Asia dollar or anything like that. If there is an Asia dollar, it's actually the US dollar. And the US dollar has been for many decades, I guess, the sort of default currency unit which people would refer to when doing international business. In the past year or two, that, of course, that sort of dominance of US dollar has been a little bit weakened, given what's been going on in the currency exchange markets globally. But still, you don't find a lot of people doing business in euros. You do find a lot of people doing business in US dollars. At some point, the Chinese currency may well revalue. Many people think it should, I believe. And it would be very interesting to see when and if that happens, how that challenges the dominance of the US dollar in international business in Asia Pac. But right now it's USD really, which most people are dealing in, and then obviously in some cases the local currencies as well. So RMB in China. This, interestingly, as a reflection of the political origins of the current government in China, this means people's money. So that's a sort of a, yeah. I find that interesting because when the communist government started that out in China, making money was really not an acceptable thing to do at all. In fact, it was the reverse. Over the course of the 60 years since the revolution, it's gone totally about face. So people's money has a totally different meaning now, and it's highly acceptable and in fact desirable to be a capitalist socialist, if that's possible. Yeah. Okay, so briefly, I'm going to go through the different regions pretty briefly. East Asia, so China, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Diversity, again, very evident here. So we range from 1.3 billion in China to 7 million people in Hong Kong. It's strictly speaking not a country anymore, part of China actually. But even Taiwan, oops, that might be part of China as well, possibly. Some people may say, but it's 23 million. And so we find interesting situations where a country like Taiwan actually generates quite well-known brands, maybe not sort of top-tier brands, but we have second-tier brands in areas like AV, IT, semiconductor, and so on, based out of Taiwan. Yet it's only a 23 million population country, which is peanuts compared to the giants of China. You quite often see a sort of reverse pattern in the GDP per capita as well in Asia. So you have very tiny countries like Hong Kong with 43,000 USD per capita GDP. Compare that with the 5,000 or 6,000 USD in China, much larger population. And in fact, the success of places like Hong Kong and Singapore is very, to some extent, in the fact that they are small, they're compact, they're nimble, they can change quickly. They don't have a huge amount of natural resources that they're dealing with. They're not engaged in primary industry. They're into the tertiary sector and to some extent manufacturing sector, that kind of thing. Yeah, Fuji, are you talking about Japan in a bit? I can mention Japan. Yeah, I mean, Japan is a fascinating place, third largest economy in the world, very, very developed. I guess, well, in my opinion, maybe the most developed market in the whole world, actually. 80% coming from the service sector, which is phenomenal. Very strong in areas like technology, electronics, of course, as we all know, and I guess some other areas which maybe are not so familiar to most people, things like chemicals and big trading houses and those kind of companies. Some big industrial conglomerates in Japan making up a significant part of the economy. Unfortunately, a few issues which Fuji's going to be in a better position to explain than me, but yeah, serious financial problems, unfortunately. However, given the strength of national character, the history, and the nature of the Japanese people, I think that will be solved